as the disparity between the wealthy and the poor increases, and the financial meltdown that occurred in the U.S. and then spread throughout the financial system worldwide continues, global voices are questioning U.S. style, and I'm from the U.S., so I can speak about this in critical terms without impunity, U.S. style winner-take-all capitalism. And I think it's well past time that we reconsider stark economic neoliberalism's capitalism and the culture it engenders, and explore the values that a global economic system should serve. So I'm making two claims here. The first is that the world religions can help us to rethink the values the global economy should serve. And the world religions can help us to reorient our global policy priorities and goals. And I'm looking at this through four lenses: Protestantism and the individual, Confucianism and affective relationships, Islam and social justice, Hinduism and spiritual wholeness for self and planet. Now, I just want to say that the things that I'm emphasizing in each of these, I recognize are in all of the religions. But there's a certain emphasis that I'm bringing out for this talk. So let's start by talking about the religious origins of U.S. capitalist culture. Why is it so individualistic? Well, we can go to Max Weber's thesis, which comes from a book that's well known by people in the field called The Protestant Ethic and the Spirit of Capitalism. And he said that there's an ideological foundation to capitalism that is based in large part on the theology of John Calvin. Calvinists came to what eventually became the United States first, and they had a tremendous impact on the culture there. So let's talk a little bit about Calvin's theology and its effects. His theology believed in predestination, and that everyone was preordained before they were even born, that they were going to spend an eternity in heaven or an eternity in suffering and hell, fire, and damnation right from the beginning of time. So you were chosen by God for heaven or not right from the beginning. There we go. So what happened was people became very, very anxious and wanted to prove to themselves that they might be one of the chosen, because it was horrible to think that you were going to suffer for all eternity in hellfire and damnation. So they looked for evidence in the world, worldly evidence. And they thought that if they were successful, that this would mean that they were one of the chosen. So they would work hard all the time, unremittingly, never stopping, using every minute of their time to do what needed to be done to try and be successful. And when they achieved monetary success, they came to the conclusion that they must have God's grace and others don't. So social and economic unfairness, inequities are justified. I'm one of God's chosen, and you're not. I have a lot of money. I'm blessed. You're in the street and poor. You know, that's just too bad. So you can see what happens is that people don't have to think about others in this way of thinking. Now, I just want to say, this has influenced U.S. culture tremendously. People no longer think that it's based on religion, but we are famous in the U.S. for trying to be absolutely efficient with every minute of our time, everything, all the time, work hard, multitask, do 5 things at once, and all of that. And this is kind of the cultural remnant of this original theology. Okay. But this Protestant ethic also implied a social benefit, and that social benefit was based on, oh, I left out a slide. So they linked self-worth, work in the world, and eternal salvation. So there was this social benefit based on responsibility, values, and voluntary groups. So everyone is responsible for themselves and their immediate families. basic honesty, respect, hard work, of course, and the idea that voluntary groups would serve and foster community aims so that you didn't need a top-down authority. You could have less government this way, and that's how that would work. So the idea was that meritorious individuals and unfettered individual ingenuity would lead to the wealth of nations, and ultimately, the good society. This is very odd. Okay. So I don't have time to go through the, or do I have time to go through critiques? Well, I'll just do it quickly. Promote self-centeredness, that the real values are competitiveness and acquisitiveness, not really those values that I mentioned before, and that these undermine ordinary morality. Fosters survival instincts in people because there's no real safety net and you're in competition all the time, and so you're operating out of that as opposed to compassion or some of the things we've been talking about here. And it leads to the commodification of everything, including your own self. My time, my whole being is money. And that's the way that comes out. And so that's a critique. So now we're going to look at Confucianism's worldview and values. And here what they're saying is that the way to the good society is through a kind of formal structure in that society, with each person having a specific role. And each role has certain obligations. So for example, you're not just a father, but you're supposed to fulfill the role of the ideal father. And that has certain obligations, taking care of the family, providing for the family, discipline, and those kinds of things. But also, other obligations, like the son has an obligation to the father as well. And all of this is based on these, what we call affective relationships or feeling relationships. And there are 5 foundational relationships in this way of thinking: ruler-subject, father-son, husband-wife, elder brother, younger brother, friend-friend. And all of them have reciprocity of mutual obligations. So what we see here is that the ultimate concern of Confucianism is this world. Remember, in Protestantism, the real concern was the afterlife, right? Here, it's this world. What are we going to do to make this world work? So Confucianism has values based on these things. Ren, which is basically virtue, reverence for ancestors and family members, selfless work, so you're not working only for your own self, but also for the honor of your family. Filial piety, which has to do with loyalty amongst family members. Li, which are the rituals of society, where society is thought of as like a great dance, and that we're working all together in harmony, all in accordance with the flow of the Tao. And that's the way that's thought about. So this Confucian relational self avoids top-down authority with merit through honor and moral inculcating education, which became really, really important. The Confucian relational self is really different than the autonomous self in the U.S. approach. Here, they're saying that you aren't even really a human being unless you're in relationship, and that you become human in your relationships, and that those relationships model reciprocity and mutuality, which become then a metaphor for society as a whole. So, some critiques here as well. The 5 relationships are hierarchical, and so everything that goes together with hierarchy, where one has power over another, can be problematic. And in those hierarchies, patriarchal. Sometimes, traditionally in any event, what happened was the wife tended to be subjugated, as in most cultures around the world. And The value of loyalty can result in entrenched interests. Even in China today, this can happen, and that can lead to kind of cronyism and corruption. So let's turn to Islam, worldview, and values. In Islam, the message is universal. The Quran makes this very clear, that what they're talking about, or what the Quran is talking about, is a moral vision for all of humanity. Its aim is a benevolent and just community. And because of this, it values fairness, altruism, and social responsibility. Now, although Islam, like Christianity, has rewards and punishments in the afterlife, it's not primarily a religion of personal salvation. It's a way of life, and the emphasis is social justice. And because of this social justice aim, it's also about economic justice as a central idea in Islam. Now, Islam famously has 5 pillars, which I'm not going to go into here, but just to mention them because I'm going to focus on almsgiving and obligatory charity. It's from this pillar that we really come to think about economic justice. So, it's an expanded meaning of almsgiving in the service of striving for the Islamic community ideal, thinking in terms of and striving for the welfare of the people as a whole. So you can see with this way of looking and this worldview and this picture, there's certainly criticism of greed and self-centeredness, which are fostered and thought to be fostered in the stark winner-take-all economic approach of neoliberalism. And so this is really a critique of that, and it's saying that it fosters unlimited ambitions, craving, acquisitiveness, fabricated scarcity because some are hoarding the resources, and what ends up happening is it undermines society as a whole and makes it very difficult to achieve that just and benevolent society that is the ideal. So gross disparities in wealth and social status are thought to be inherently immoral and leading to the overall moral decay of society. And this has manifested itself in particular of recent years in concern about a global financial system where money is detached from the objects that give value, commodities are detached from the social relations that bring them into being, and persons are detached from what is being done in their names. In other words, you can be doing something that is contributing to a terrible evil somewhere else. It can be as simple as buying a pair of tennis shoes, right, where you are supporting horrible labor somewhere else in the world. Critiques. Islam has not realized its social equity ideal anywhere. And there's all kinds of reasons that we could go into about why that might be. But we don't have time for that here. It has tended toward, not always, but tended towards authoritarianism. There has been, despite that ideal, exploitation of the weak and indigent in some Islamic countries. And because of the onslaught of the system around the world, sometimes there's this idea of the guarded sphere of the home, and that can result in subjugation of women in some places. Hinduism. Hinduism has been said by some scholars to be deeply biological. The universe as a great living organism. And the central theme is, as you all know, one's true self, Atman, is the divine ultimate, Brahman. So I was at a conference and a woman pointed this out by saying this. She says, in our religion, we don't only say, love your neighbor as yourself, but also your neighbor is yourself, which is a whole other way of thinking about self in relation to others. So Hinduism's society is not an aggregate of individuals, but rather is a holy whole. It's holistic, as we've been talking about here. And the goal is realization, awakening to a total cosmic vision, which is true being and righteousness. And this way of thinking eschews unbound pursuit of desires and emphasizes a holistic happiness, which, if I had time, I could go into a lot more, as I could some of these others as well, but we've done a lot of that here already at this conference. Ahimsa, which according to Gandhi, recognizing that all paths to the divine have something to offer, and that's part of what I'm trying to show here with this project. Hinduism calls us to revision self and planet, to think of ourselves not only as having to doing, but being, right? Not time as a quantity, which is the way we think about it in the U.S. in particular, but as quality. And that in deep meditation, for example, you can regain eternity. You can regain time. It's not even measurable, right? And all of this is a call to universal consciousness. And this universal consciousness is a holistic vision of reality where one understands and experiences the interconnectedness of all. And because of that, it deifies nature, the deification of nature. We have earth as goddess, trees and rivers as deities. We have deities of place. And because all is sacred, exploitative consumption and pollution of the environment is really an affront to the gods. So, the classic critique of Hinduism is its traditionalism and otherworldliness. There's the legacy of caste, which is still being overcome, but is being overcome, and that creates social and economic disabilities traditionally, which is in the process of being overcome. Renunciation, if it's taken too seriously, can impede consumption to the point where it can undermine the vitality of an economy. We were talking about this in the car last night and saying there needs to be balance. There's nothing wrong with consumption, but it needs to be in balance. And there's no tradition of environmental protection. Even in the holiest places in India, you'll find, as you know, right here in your own city, garbage in some of the most holy places. And so while the earth is sacred, that tradition of environmental protection hasn't been taken as seriously, at least on the local level, as one might have thought. So, implications for a moral economy, my overview, is that Protestantism, we can reframe individualism. Let's not throw individualism out entirely, but let's not have it be what we've been calling it, and which I'll talk about in just a second. Confucianism, we need to be supporting family and community. Islam, we need to promote economic fairness and justice. Hinduism, we need to do what we've been doing at this conference here, engender universal spiritual consciousness for self and planet. Okay. So, some specifics just to conclude. In reframing individualism, not as self-centeredness, but as bringing one's best self, right? One's best self to make a contribution. We need policies that embrace the inherent worth and dignity of all human persons, which would imply and hopefully engender and recognize the right to food, shelter, livable wages, and an opportunity to advance. Well-being of relationships as a public policy goal. We need policies to support the family, tax subsidies, and exemptions. Public and business policies need to provide time to raise children. Policies to support stay-at-home parents' contribution in society. and education to foster virtue, responsibility, mutuality, and reciprocity, which comes from Confucianism, but is something we really actually can't deny. It's a fact. Economic fairness. Policies should be mindful of and address gross inequities in social and economic distribution outcomes. Regulations that take account of expanded understanding of riba, not only as unjust interest, but also other far unfair exchange practices. And greater accountability and transparency in the global financial system. We need to work toward a shift to universal consciousness, the revisioning of self and planet as a holy whole, interconnected and sacred. We need to acknowledge what really leads to happiness, holistic happiness, as we've been talking about here, and understanding oneself as contributing to the balance and vitality of the whole. And we need education and policies that promote environmental protection, as the earth is our mother. Whether or not you believe that as a religious idea, it just happens to be the absolute fact. So, in conclusion, I'd just like to say this. The world religions see in stark economic neoliberalism serious flaws that cannot be ignored. Atomization and dehumanization of the individual, the de-emphasis of family and other relationships, the disregard of social welfare and the threat to the health of the earth, these flaws cannot be ignored. Attempts to remedy the negative effects of economic neoliberalism's stark capitalism at the business and institutional level through individual and managerial ethics and corporate social responsibility is a worthy goal, but it is not enough. Those negative effects must be addressed at the global, societal, family, community, and personal spiritual levels, and be supported by public policies founded on values such as those suggested here. This effort could be aided by looking to the wisdom of the world religions, not in the ways necessarily that they have been manifested so far, but in their aspirations for a better world. Thank you.